everybody. So I said I was going to try to do better at updating with videos more regularly. So this is to kind of tell you a little bit more details about what has happened over the last few weeks. So about a month ago, as we were suctioning Samara's trach, we started noticing that as we passed the suction catheter through her trach, we would find resistance as we got deeper into her trach. And it was something new because we've been suctioning her since she's had her trach at 3 weeks old, and we've never had this issue in any position. After trying to get some appointments or whatever, it was decided that it was best for us to just go to the ER. So about a month ago, we came to the ER to get it checked because mucus and plugs are one of the biggest emergencies that a child with a trach can have. We came to the ER, and the respiratory therapist, she tried to suction her multiple times and she didn't meet any resistance. We know now that it was because it was positional. Samara was kind of sitting straight up, and so in the position that she was in, the suction catheter was able to go through the little opening that she had for her airway. Long story short, her oxygen levels were great. Samara was calm and quiet the whole time we were in the ER that day. And since there was no resistance found, they did notify ENT, but no one came to do a scope, and we were discharged from the hospital. We go home and we start finding resistance again. So we knew that there was a problem. Long story short, about a week later, we were finally able to get in to see her ENT doctor. And as soon as she did the scope, she saw the granuloma. At that time, she ordered some drops for her throat called Ciprodex and told us to come back in 5 days because it should shrink the granuloma. We came back 5 days later. She did another scope and saw that although it did shrink probably a little bit, it still was pretty big. So she was like, let's order something different, and she ordered prednisone drops. And then we called her again and we spoke about it a few days later because we were still finding resistance. And at that point, we got more aggressive with the prednisone, and she was getting drops in her trach. She was getting nebulized steroids, and she was getting medication through her G-tube straight into her stomach. And the plan was follow up and, call if there were any issues, follow up in a couple of weeks with an appointment just to see. And by then it should have shrank. Well, shortly after this appointment, a few days later, we end up testing positive for COVID. So that one in itself is a whole testimony. But long story short, Samara didn't have any symptoms of COVID and has had 2 negative tests. The rest of us in the house had COVID. I had coughing and tiredness, and Sammy, it hit him pretty bad, and he had pretty much all of the symptoms, including extreme fatigue and shortness of breath. And Nathan was asymptomatic the whole time, but this left me to take care of the whole household without any nursing. We still hadn't gotten any nursing at this point. And despite the fact that we were feeling resistance, Samara was having mostly good days. Every once in a while in certain positions, we could see she was having difficulty breathing and she would desat pretty low. We were bagging her, which is the ambu bag that I have talked about in other videos. We were using that sometimes if her oxygen dropped, but then she would rise right back up to good oxygen levels and she'd be fine for another day or two. And so because we had COVID, we did communicate with her doctors, her pulmonologist, and her ENT team and neurology. We told everybody, and the thought was, well, if you guys have COVID and she's not symptomatic and she's pretty stable and you can manage her at home, keep her home unless you feel like you can't manage her and she needs to come to the ER. But if you guys are still within your infectious period and still having symptoms, then you can't come into the hospital. We would pretty much get her in the ER and you would have to leave her with us. And that for me was just like not an option. So I was praying really hard that Samara would remain stable enough until we got out of this craziness and the period of like infectious symptoms and past the 10 days from the positive test, so that if necessary, I would be able, or we would be able to be here in the hospital with her. We finally, on a positive note, started getting nurses. After we were cleared from the whole COVID thing, Nathan went back to school on Wednesday of last week. We called the nursing agency and said, we're ready now, because the week we got diagnosed, they were ready to start staffing us. We have a new agency and they were ready to start giving us nurses. But as soon as they heard we had COVID, they were like, we don't have a nurse that's willing to go out there. So we basically had to deal with COVID on our own. So this was me exhausted. Thank God I wasn't affected the way Sammy was affected, because if both of us would have gotten it as bad as he did, I don't know how we would have managed taking care of Samara and the issues that she was having with her granuloma, etc. So I was functioning on faith and adrenaline for the last almost month at this point. Well, fast forward to last week, Wednesday, we were cleared. Nathan went back to school. And now I have Samara. I'm holding her. I actually started recording this yesterday, and I got a lot of interruptions, so I couldn't finish. But now I'm holding her, and she's doing okay. Her eyes are draining a little bit, and she was just sleeping, but she's waking up. I contacted the nursing agency and let them know that we were ready to go ahead and start getting nurses again. On Thursday, we started getting nursing. We got a nurse on Thursday, a nurse on Friday, and then we got a nurse on Friday night, and I think Samara may have scared her away. Samara had a rough night on Friday. She had a lot of DSATs, which is when her oxygen drops. And by Saturday, early or mid-morning, we were like, you know what? Her alarms are going off way too much more than we're comfortable with. And we just figured since we had appointments coming up this week anyway, instead of waiting for the appointments, we would just bring her into the emergency room because she also had, like I said, she had diarrhea and other little symptoms that we saw that just weren't making us comfortable. So we brought her to the ER on Saturday, early afternoon. And when I mentioned the DSATs, her oxygen was dropping, but then it would come right back up to 100. So it's not like we felt like we had to run to the emergency room as it was happening because she'd be sleeping and her oxygen all of a sudden would drop and then it would come right back up. Nothing really needed to be done. She didn't need to be bagged at all overnight. Like we didn't use the amber bag at all or anything like that. She would drop and then she would come back up slowly on her own or sometimes very quickly. But then Saturday when we decided to come in, you know, we really felt impressed to do so, and I'm glad that we did because we got a little bit more explanations as to what was happening and why she potentially was having those drops in oxygen. So it turns out that aside from the granuloma, which was still very large when they did the scope, and blocking her airway pretty significantly, she also had an infection in her lungs. Her chest x-ray showed some sort of pneumonia, and when they did her sputum culture, it showed that she had several different bacteria growing, and she also has a UTI. So Samara gets infections very easily despite all our efforts to keep everything very clean and constantly wiping things down, and we have gloves galore. She does get infections quite easily, and so we are following up with immunology to see if there's some type of immunological problem, and if there's anything that can be done about it. And so we're waiting till she's not having all these infections actively to be able to get her labs done to see what is going on and why she's so easily susceptible to infection. So Sunday was a very stressful day. Surgery was scheduled first for 9 a.m. and then it was pushed back to 12 p.m. and we were originally told it would only take like 15 to 20 minutes or so. And as you all know from the updates I was providing online, it ended up taking almost 2 hours. It was close to like an hour, maybe 30 to 45 minutes to finish the surgery because when he went in, the surgeon went through her mouth to reach her throat area, her trach area, and found that there was a lot more granulation tissue than anticipated, and her airway was inflamed, and there was a lot more than they expected, and he believes that she was having a reaction to her trach. And that's a long story, but she basically got a customized trach back in July sometime, and ever since then is when we started seeing some of the changes happening with her in terms of more difficulty suctioning and rashes and stuff like that. And so yesterday they changed her trach, and let me see it. You can't even see it because she barely has a neck, but she went from what's called a Bavona trach, and I'll put pictures in this video, to a Shiley. So it's just a different brand, and it's kind of made a little differently to help her airway. They also did some changes to her vent and increased some of her settings because one of the concerns was that the right side of her airway is weak and so could potentially collapse. And so they increased the settings on her vents to help maintain the pressure in her airway to avoid some of these desats that we were experiencing. So we will be here for probably a few more days. They are planning to give her a total of 7 days of antibiotics. She's getting them in her injections in her thighs, intramuscular, versus IV because they haven't been able to get IV access. And so they're working on that. We're also working on changing her food from formula, infant formula, to like a real food blend where she'll get like a plant-based diet. So that's really something we've been looking forward to doing. And that is pretty much the update for this video. I know it's a little long and I could probably give a lot more details, but it's been a very stressful time, especially as I waited by myself in a waiting area because they were only allowing one parent here for the surgery due to the COVID rules. So that was really intense as I got no updates and was waiting while she was in surgery to find out what was happening. So that's pretty much the update. She's stable now. Her eyes draining, so and she's a little upset, so, and still rashy and whatnot, but overall she's doing very well, recovering very well, and we're just here getting the rest of her antibiotics until they can switch her to a medication that will go through her G-tube. And then we hope to be home sometime over the weekend or Monday at the latest, because the week after that Samara turns 1 and we will be celebrating her birthday. And so stay tuned for more videos and more updates. I thank you all for watching and for praying and for reaching out to me. So many people have reached out to me and to Sammy, and we're grateful for all the prayers. May God bless you all. Thank you so much. Take care. Blessings. Bye-bye.